The season isn't over yet. Ohtani said it once. Just once. In a room that had been loud with frustration and fractured by the kind of tension that accumulates over weeks of underperformance and unanswered questions and conversations that keep circling back to the same uncomfortable place. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up dramatically or gesture toward the scoreboard or invoke October the way people invoke October when they are trying to manufacture urgency that isn't naturally there. He just said it. And the room went completely still. One comment. One sentence. Delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who has competed at the highest level long enough to know the difference between a season that is genuinely over and a season that only feels that way. The difference between a team that has run out of answers and a team that simply hasn't found the right ones yet. The room stayed still for a long moment after that. And then Dave Roberts looked around at the faces in front of him and understood that something had just shifted. Not dramatically. Not with any announcement. But shifted in the way that matters most, in the internal temperature of a group of people who had been trending in one direction and were now, because of one quiet sentence from one extraordinary person, trending somewhere else entirely. The Dodgers were not done. Ohtani had said so. It had been building towards something for longer than anyone in that organization was comfortable admitting publicly. The losses had accumulated in the way losses accumulate for a team that expects to win, not in a flood, not in a collapse that announces itself clearly and demands an immediate response, but slowly. Quietly. In the space between what this roster was supposed to produce and what it had actually been producing in the weeks that mattered. The front office had been watching. Roberts had been watching. The data had been reviewed with the kind of frequency that signals genuine concern rather than routine monitoring. And at some point, the exact moment is difficult to pinpoint because these moments rarely arrive with clean timestamps. The watching had to become deciding. The GM called Roberts. The conversation was not long. When two people have been working together long enough and trust each other's read of a situation, the conversation doesn't need to be long. What needed to be said was said. What needed to be decided was decided. And then Roberts walked into the room where his players were waiting. The lineup revision was not what anyone expected. Not because it was reckless. Not because it ignored the data or the matchups or the careful calculus of a contending team trying to maximize every advantage available to it. It was unexpected because of the names. Because of the specific choices made about who goes in and who comes out and what that arrangement of names says about where this team believes its best chance of winning actually lives. 3 replacements. Announced not with the soft language of experimentation but with the firm, clear tone of a decision that has been made and will not immediately be unmade. 3 new names and spots that had belonged to established players, players with track records and contracts and the kind of organizational investment that makes these decisions complicated even when they are necessary. The room heard the names. And 2 of the people in that room did not accept them quietly. Kyle Tucker had heard a lot of things this season. He had heard the murmurs about his production. He had heard the careful, diplomatic language that organizations use when they are managing a situation that hasn't yet become a crisis. He had sat through film sessions and conversations and the kind of measured feedback that is delivered with one hand while the other hand prepares for a different possibility entirely. He had processed all of it. He had not been blind to any of it. But hearing his name removed from that starting lineup, hearing it replaced, hearing the specific name of the player who would now occupy the spot that he had considered his, produced something in Tucker that the previous weeks of murmurs and careful language had not produced. He pushed back. Not quietly. Not with the resigned acceptance of a veteran who has been around long enough to understand that these decisions are made and then they are lived with. He pushed back the way someone pushes back when they believe genuinely and completely that the decision being made is the wrong one. The way someone pushes back when they still have something left to prove and cannot accept that the opportunity to prove it is being taken away. Teoscar Hernandez was not far behind him. Hernandez had his own version of the same argument. Different details, same essential conviction, that the lineup Roberts had just announced was not the lineup that gave this team its best chance. That the replacements, however promising, however supported by recent data and matchup advantages and all the other vocabulary of modern baseball decision-making, were not the answer to a problem that required something more familiar, more proven, more battle-tested. He said it clearly and directly in the way that Hernandez tends to say things, without excessive decoration, without the kind of political awareness that sometimes softens what a player actually believes into something more manageable for the people listening. The room had been tense before. Now it was something beyond tense. Robert stood at the front of it and absorbed what was happening with the expression of a man who had not been entirely surprised. Who had perhaps anticipated that these specific names would produce this specific reaction. Who had prepared himself for this moment without knowing exactly when it would arrive or precisely what shape it would take. He let them speak. He did not interrupt. He did not immediately reach for the authority of his position to shut down a conversation that was making the room uncomfortable. He let it happen. Because sometimes the most important thing a manager can do is let the room be exactly as difficult as it needs to be before the thing that resolves it has a chance to arrive. And then Ohtani spoke. He had been quiet through Tucker's pushback and through Hernandez's version of the same argument and through the extended, uncomfortable silence that followed both of them. He had been present, fully, attentively present, in the way that Ohtani is present in rooms that matter. Not distant. Not above it. Not performing the detachment of someone who considers himself exempt from the difficulties that ordinary players navigate. He had been listening. And when he spoke, it was not to take a side. It was not to validate Robert's decision or to validate Tucker and Hernandez and the frustration they had just placed in the middle of the room for everyone to sit with. It was not a speech. It was not the kind of extended motivational address that gets reconstructed later in admiring detail by the people who were present. It was one comment. Short enough that the translation, when it came, carried the full weight of the original without losing anything in the journey between languages. The season isn't over yet. Those 5 words did something to the room that neither Robert's authority nor Tucker's frustration nor Hernandez's directness had been able to do. They reframed everything. Not by dismissing the tension or pretending the lineup dispute hadn't happened or suggesting that the losses of the previous weeks were less real than they were. They reframed it by placing all of it, the losses, the lineup changes, the rebellion, the uncertainty, inside a larger context that everyone in that room understood but had perhaps temporarily lost sight of. There was still time. There were still games. There was still a version of this season that ended the way Dodgers seasons are supposed to end, not in a quiet press conference about what went wrong, but in the kind of October noise that this city has learned to expect from this franchise. Ohtani knew that. He believed it in the way he believes things, not as motivation, not as a slogan, but as a genuine assessment of a situation that other people were evaluating with less clarity than it deserved. The season isn't over yet. Tucker heard it. Something in his expression shifted by a fraction, not enough to constitute surrender, not enough to signal that his pushback had dissolved entirely. But enough. Enough to suggest that the argument he had been making, the one that had felt so urgent 60 seconds earlier, had been placed in a context that made it feel slightly different. Hernandez heard it. He looked at Ohtani for a moment, a long moment, and then looked at the floor. Roberts heard it and felt something that experienced managers feel in the rare moments when the thing they needed to happen happens without them being the one to make it happen. The revised lineup was posted. The 3 replacements were there exactly as Roberts had announced them, unchanged, uncompromised, delivered with the same clarity and the same finality that had produced the rebellion in the first place. Tucker's name was not in the starting 9. Hernandez's name was not where he expected it to be. But something in the atmosphere around those decisions had changed. Not because Ohtani had made the lineup dispute disappear. He hadn't. Not because Tucker and Hernandez had been converted into enthusiastic supporters of a plan they had just argued against. They hadn't. But because one sentence, 5 words, had reminded everyone in that room that the argument they were having was a luxury. That teams fighting for something real don't have the time to let lineup disputes become the story. That the scoreboard doesn't care about what was said in the room before the game. It only cares about what happens after. Roberts spoke briefly after the session ended. Not to the media. Not yet. To the coaches gathered near his office, in the low, quiet voice he uses when the formal part of the day has finished and what remains is the honest version of what he is actually thinking. He said the room had been difficult. He said he had expected that. He said Tucker and Hernandez had said what they needed to say and he respected the competitive instinct behind it even when he couldn't accommodate the conclusion they were pushing toward. And then he said something about Ohtani. He said it carefully. With the particular kind of care that people use when they are trying to describe something that sits just outside the boundaries of what sports vocabulary was designed to capture. He said that in 15 years of managing baseball games, in every clubhouse, in every difficult moment, in every room where a season hung in a particular kind of balance, he had never seen one person change the temperature of a situation the way Ohtani had changed it. With 5 words. Without raising his voice. Without making it about himself for even a fraction of a second. He paused there for a moment. The coaches around him stayed quiet. Then Roberts shook his head slightly, not in disbelief, but in the specific kind of amazement that arrives when you have witnessed something and you still cannot fully explain how it worked.